When life knocks you down, and life will knock you down, try to land on your back. Because if you can look up, you can get up. Welcome to Fire with Dr. Ninja Turtle.
Hi everyone, welcome to Fire with Dr. Ninja Turtle. This is my very first YouTube video, and so I am a retired person, a retired federal employee, and in this video I'm going to tell you my origin story of how I went from homeless to financial freedom. Now keep in mind that financial freedom is relative. My financial freedom is not your financial freedom. It's when I have enough. And so that's where I'm at right now, is I have enough, not that I'm stopping, but that I have enough to retire. And so what I'm going to tell you about in this story is how did I become homeless? How did I go from homeless to where I am today? And I retired early as part of the FIRE movement. So at the age of 25, I was sitting in a homeless shelter wondering how I got there. And because of some bad choices that I made, I ended up in the homeless shelter. When I got out of the homeless shelter, I moved into an apartment in a somewhat bad neighborhood, which was all I could afford, moving out of a homeless shelter. And then I continued to make bad choices and didn't pay my rent for another 3 months. So at the end of that 3 months, I had a 3-day eviction notice on my door. I went to my landlord and I asked him if I could pay him back the 3 months of back rent so I would not become homeless again. And he allowed me to stay. So I went out and I got a second job and I gave all of my money from both jobs to my landlord to pay the back rent so that he would not evict me. What I did was all of my money had to go to him. So what I did to eat was I fished. I fished in the San Francisco Bay for food, and that's how I survived. Within about 30 days of this happening, I went to court for not paying child support. And the judge said, if you don't make a payment out of your next paycheck, you're going to jail. And so at that point, I'm paying my landlord the money I owe him. I'm paying the child support people the money I owe them. Again, no money for food. So I'm fishing to eat in the San Francisco Bay. And so that's how I survived for quite a while. I went back to school and learned a little trade, just a little trade school to fix microwave electronics. And at that point, I needed a car. And so I went to my landlord and I asked him if he knew anybody that had a car that I could get so that I could get to my new job. And my landlord said he had a car, it was $400 down, it was $400 and $40 down and $40 a month. And so that's what I did. I had this $400 car and the reverse went out in my car. And so I would open the door and push the car back. And that's how I would get out of parking spots with that car. And that's how I started. I started with nothing. And what happened was, when that car finally broke down, I moved to another part of my company that was closer to my house. And I started using a bicycle to get to work. I used a motorcycle to get to work, which is how I started riding motorcycles. And so with this happening, I found a way for me to volunteer to go and install equipment that I was a final test technician with. And with that, I started traveling around the world with my job. And when that job ended a couple of years later, I decided I liked traveling around the world. So I went and I found another job. And with that job, I was able to go and live on the island of Cyprus. I lived in Saudi Arabia for 2.5 years, and then I lived in the south of France. When that job ended, that was about 6 years living in Europe. When that job ended, I could not afford to live in California. And so I did not know about geo arbitrage, but I figured it out. I can't afford to live here. Where can I take my money and afford to live? So I moved to Vermont. And in Vermont, I was able to buy my very first property, a condo. And in Vermont, I got a job multiple jobs, job after job after job. So I ended up as a technician in a company, and it was a small manufacturing company. And what they did was they laid off the entire company in December, just before Christmas. And so here I am in Vermont without a job. So I started looking for a job coming up on Christmas, and I found a job as a desktop technician on computers with the federal courts. And that's how I ended up being a federal employee. Now, the pay was less than what I was making at the company, but it was a job. And I did not want to get laid off anymore. And so when that happened, I started with the federal government. Within a couple of years, I moved to a court in Miami from Vermont, and then I moved from the court in Miami to the court in DC. And that's where I ended up retiring from. But that's not the end of my story. See, I still didn't have any money because I, in Vermont, tried to start buying rental properties. And so my first property was I sold my condo, and then I moved into the basement of a house. And I rented out the top of the house and just lived in the basement. When I sold that house after 2 years, I bought my first duplex. And I lived on one side, and I let a retired electrician live on the other side. And while I was at work during the day, he rewired the whole building. And then, while in Vermont, I tried to go to college. I said I just want to pass one college class because I had failed so many times at college. I wanted to pass one college class to prove that I could have gone to college. And so I took the one class, and then I took another class, and another class. Now, while this is going on, this guy is rewiring my duplex, and I'm coming home from school at night, and I'm cleaning up everything from his rewiring, and I'm learning how wiring works in a house. And so as this is going on, I leave Vermont and I go to the court in Miami. And I'm still going to college in the court in Miami. And then I move from Miami to DC. I've still got the duplex in Vermont. And so I'm trying to be a long distance landlord, and I am the most horrible long distance landlord. So I will never manage a property ever again. So what happened there was when I moved to DC, I was just about to finish my bachelor's degree. And so when I get to DC, I get a bachelor's degree, I get a master's degree, and I get a second master's degree. And now I'm applying for jobs at the federal court as an assistant manager in the IT department. Well, the government decides to shrink the federal government. And what my court did was they demoted me. They demoted me so low that I could not apply for any assistant manager positions. And at this time, I have 2 master's degrees and no career, upward mobility at all. So what did I do? I went to school for my PhD. And as they were cutting my pay, and they said, we're going to cut your pay so much that we're not going to do it over just the course of 1 year. We're going to cut your pay over the course of 3 years. So every year that I went to work, I made less money. And so as I started getting my PhD, I applied for a second job again because I am good at working multiple jobs. And so I became a teaching assistant for the master's program where I got my master's degree. And I started working on my PhD. Well, 5 years later, I finished my PhD. And then I started looking for teaching jobs. And I became a teacher and a federal government employee. So I did not let them keep me down because they decided that my job and my value was worth less. I did not let that happen. So for 5 years, I worked as a college professor and a federal government employee. until my college teaching income equaled my federal income. And that's when I was able to retire early. Once my side hustle equaled my regular income, my 9 to 5, and I was qualified for retirement, which I'll talk about in another video, I retired at 58 and a half years old. I took delayed pension, so I did not get my pension until I was 60. And so that's my origin story of how I became Dr. Ninja Turtle and fired with the FIRE movement.